Hi, we are going to be doing chapter 19 today, and it is called High Places. And so I figured that there would be no better place to do it than on the high places. So I wanted to show you where I am right now. It's just absolutely gorgeous. I wanted you to be able to see. So peaceful. I decided to come up in the morning early, so there's not people here and have a little bit of privacy. Um, so we can go ahead and get started. This is, in case you're wondering, I am at the Smoky Mountains. So I had actually been only coming up here for about a month when I literally saw at the top deer jumping down. So it was so awesome. I literally got to see Hinds feet on high places. That was the one and only time I saw them. So thankfully I haven't seen any bears. Obviously they are here. So let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 19, High Places. Grace and Glory, with her handmaidens Joy and Peace, stayed up on the high places for several weeks, while all three explored the heights and learned many new lessons from the king. He led them himself to many places and explained to them as much as they were able to understand at the time. He also encouraged them to explore on their own, for there are always new and lovely discoveries to make up there on the high places. Even these high places were not the highest of all. Others towered above them into the sky, where mortal eye could no longer follow them, and where only those who have finished their pilgrim life on earth could go. Grace and Glory and her friends were on the lowest, the beginner's slopes in the kingdom of love. And these were the parts which they were to explore and enjoy at this time. From these slopes, too, they were able to look down on the valleys below, and from that new viewpoint gain an understanding of many things which had been puzzling and mysterious to them before. From beneath they had not been seen clearly, and even then only a small part had been visible. The first thing, however, which they realized up there on the slopes of the kingdom of love was how much more there would be to see and learn and understand when the king took them higher on future occasions. The glorious view which they now enjoyed was but small in comparison with all that lay beyond, and would be visible only from yet higher places above. It was now perfectly evident to them that there must be ranges upon ranges, which they had never dreamed while they were still down in the narrow valley, with their extraordinary limited views. Sometimes, as she looked on the glorious panorama visible from these lowest slopes in the kingdom of love, she found herself blushing as she remembered some of the dogmatic statements which she and others had made in the depths of the valley about the high places and the ranges of truth. They had been able to see so little and were so unconscious of what lay beyond and above. If that had been the case while down in the valley, how much more clearly she now realized that even up on those wonderful slopes she was only looking on a tiny corner of the whole. She never tired of looking from the glorious new viewpoint on the first slopes of the kingdom of love and seeing it all from a new perspective. What she could see and could take in almost intoxicated her with joy and thanksgiving, and sometimes even with inexpressible relief. Things which she had thought dark and terrible, and which had made her tremble as she looked up from the valley, because they had seemed so alien to be any part of the realm of love, were now seen to be parts of a great and wonderful whole. They were so altered and modified that as she saw what they extended into, she wondered at having been so blind and stupid, at having such false ideas about them. She began to understand quite clearly that truth cannot be understood from books or written words alone, only by personal growth and development and an understanding, and that things written even in the book of books can be astonishingly misunderstood while one still lives on the low levels of spiritual experience and the wrong side of the grave on the mountains. She perceived that no one who finds herself on top of the slopes of the kingdom of love can possibly dogmatize about what is seen there, because it is only then that she comprehends how small a part of this glorious whole she sees. All she can do is gasp with wonder and awe and thanksgiving, and to long with all her heart to go higher and see and understand more. Paradoxical as it may seem, as she gazed out on the dazzling vistas, so glorious that she could not look at them steadily or grasp their magnificent sweep, she often thought that the prayer which best expressed her heart's desire was that of the blind man. Lord, that I might receive my sight. Help me to open myself to more light. Help me to fuller understanding. Another thing which gave her continual joy was their unbroken communion with the King. Wherever he went, she and peace and joy went too, springing behind him with a delight which at times was almost hilarious, for he was teaching and training them to use their hinds feet. Grace and Glory quickly saw, however, that he always chose the way most careful and restrained his own amazing strength and power, taking only such springs and bounds as they could manage to. So graciously did he adapt himself to what was possible to their newly acquired capacity that they scarcely recognized in the exhilaration of leaping and skipping like hinds on the mountains that he had really extended his powers. Had he really extended his powers, they would have been left behind completely. For Grace and Glory, who had been lame and limping all her life, the ecstasy of leaping this way, I lost my spot, and of bounding from rock to rock on the high places as easily as the mountain rose was so rapturous that she could hardly bear to cease from it even for rests. The king seemed to find great delight in encouraging this, and led her and on, taking longer and longer leaps, until at last she would be quite breathless. Then, as they sat side by side on some new crag to which he had led her, while she rested, he would point out some of the vistas to be seen from the new viewpoint. On one of the occasions, after they had been up on the high places for several days, she flung herself down on the moss-covered crag to which he had led her, and, laughing and breathless, she said, "Even Hinds' feet seem to need a rest now and then." "Grace and Glory," he answered, "do you think you understand now how I was able to make your feet like hinds' feet and to set you on these high places?" She drew closer to him and looked earnestly in his face and said, "How were you able to do this, my lord?" "Think back over the journey you made," he replied, "and tell me what lessons you learned on the way." She was silent for a while as she reviewed the whole journey, which seemed so terribly long and in some places so cruelly difficult and even impossible. She thought of the altars that she built along the way, of the time when she had stood with him at the trysting place in the valley, when he had called her to follow him to the heights. She remembered the walk to the foot of the mountains, the first meeting with suffering and sorrow, and learning to accept their help. She recalled the shock of what had seemed such a heartbreaking detour down through the desert, and of the things which she had seen there. Then their journey along the shores of loneliness, the empty cove that the sea had filled to the brim, and then the agony of disappointment and frustration experienced in the wilderness when the path once again led away from the high places. She remembered crossing the great sea wall, walking through the woods and the valleys until the rapturous moment when the path turned back to the mountains. Her thoughts turned to the precipice of injury, the forests of danger and tribulation, the great storm during which they had sheltered in the hut, and then the mist, the endless mist. And the awful disappointment when the path suddenly led down to the valley of loss, and the nightmare abyss of horror into which she had looked when she had thought of turning back. She recalled the descent down into the valley of loss and the peace that she found there before reascending the heights in the aerial chairs, and of the days spent in that place where she had been prepared for her burial. Then that last agonizing ascent in the cave where they sheltered from the floods, and she had been tempted to cast away all the promises. Then the spring called Mara, and finally the mist-shrouded grave up among the peaks where she had been bound to the altar. How little she had imagined, when first she set out on that strange journey, what lay ahead of her and the things that she would be called upon to pass through. So for a long time she sat silent, remembering, wondering, and thankful. At last she put her hand in his and said, "My Lord, I will tell you what I learned." "Tell me," he said gently. "First," she said, "I learned that I must accept with joy all that you allowed to happen to me on the way and everything to which the path led me. That I was never to try to evade it, but to accept it and lay down my own will on the altar and say, 'Behold me, I am thy little handmaiden, acceptance with joy.'" He nodded without speaking, and she went on. "Then I learned that I must bear all that others were allowed to do against me, and that to forgive with no trace of bitterness, and to say to thee, 'Behold me, I am thy little handmaiden, bearing with love,' that I may receive power to bring good out of evil." Again he nodded, and she smiled still more sweetly and happily. "The third thing that I learned was that you, my Lord, never regarded me as I actually was, lame and weak, crooked and cowardly. You saw me as I would be when you had done what you promised and had brought me to the high places. And when it could be truly said, 'There is none that walks with such a queenly ease nor such grace as she.' You always treated me with the same love and graciousness as though I were queen already, and not little wretched much afraid." Then she looked up into his face, and for a little time could say no more, but then added, "My Lord, I cannot tell you how greatly I want to regard others in the same way." A very lovely smile broke out across his face at that, but he still said nothing, only nodded for the third time and waited for her to continue. "The fourth thing," she said with a radiant face, "was really the first I learned up here. Every circumstance in life, no matter how crooked, distorted, or ugly it may be at the time or appear, if it is received in love and forgiveness and obedience to your will, it can be transformed. Therefore, I began to think my Lord, you purposely allow us to be brought into contact with bad and evil things that you want changed. Perhaps that is the very reason why we are here on earth, in this world, where sin, sorrow, and suffering and evil abound, so that we may let you teach us so to react to them that out of them we can create lovely qualities to live forever. That is the only really satisfactory way of dealing with evil, not simply binding it so it can't work harm, but whenever possible, overcoming it with good. At last he spoke. You have learned well, Grace and Glory. Now I will add one thing more. It was these lessons which you have learned which enabled me to change you from limping, crippled, much afraid, into grace and glory with Hinds' feet. Now you are able to run, leaping on the mountains, and able to follow me wherever I go, so that we never need be parted again. So remember this. As long as you are willing to be acceptance with joy and bearing in love, you can never again become crippled, and you will be able to go wherever I lead you. You will be able to go down into the valley of the world to work with me there, for that is where the evil and sorrowful and ugly things are that need to be overcome. Accept and bear and obey the law of love, and nothing shall be able to cripple your hinds feet or separate you from me. This is the secret of the high places, grace and glory. It is the lovely and perfect law of the whole universe. It is this that makes the radiant joy of the heavenly places. Then he rose to his feet, drew her up beside him, and said, Now, use your hinds feet again, for I am going to lead you to another part of the mountain. And off he went, leaping on the mountains and skipping on the hills, with grace and glory following close behind, and the beautiful figures of peace and joy springing at her side. And as they went, she sang a song that went, Set me as a seal upon thine heart, thou love more strong than death, that I may feel through every part thy burning, fiery breath. And then, like wax held in the flame, may take the imprint of thy name. Set me as a seal upon thine arm, thou love that bursts the grave. Thy coals of fire can never harm, but only purge and save. Thou jealous love, thou burning flame, O burn out all unlike thy name. The floods can never drown thy love, nor weaken thy desire. The rains may deluge from above, but never quench thy fire. Make soft my heart in thy strong flame, to take the imprint of thy name. And that is the chapter. I hope you have a great day. God bless you.